Well, welcome to another edition of the Influence Global podcast. And I'm delighted to have another special guest with me today, who I've been wanting to have on my podcast for some time, actually. But I think diaries just clashed and it wasn't possible. And that is Martyn Sibley, who is the CEO and founder of the Purple Goat Agency. And in today's episode, we're really going to talk about the disabled community, which is an area that has fascinated me for a while. And Martyn feels very strongly about inclusion and diversity, and obviously disabled himself. He's going to talk to us about a number of really interesting things about why brands should really work with disabled creators. So, Martyn, a lovely warm welcome to the show today.
Thank you for having me, Gordon.
That's great. So for our viewers and listeners, just tell us a little bit about, why you came to set up the agency and perhaps a little bit about your journey before that.
Yeah, thank you. So as you mentioned, I'm disabled myself. So I think that is obviously quite a big part of the disability, the lived experience. So I was born with a neuromuscular condition. I had my first electric wheelchair when I was about 3 years old. And I've always required a lot of personal care support for day-to-day activities. Like I can't walk at all. I have to hoist in and out of the wheelchair, and, a care team assist with a lot of the sort of day-to-day living. So, that obviously growing up with a disability, I've faced various barriers, a little language thing for people around sort of through more of the disability activism and social change work that I've done more in my career, the last sort of 15, 20 years. I use the word disabled person as it's through the concept that it's disabled by barriers of society. So I have a medical condition called spinal muscular atrophy, but I'm disabled by barriers that exist in the physical environment, exist through attitudes, exist through policies and procedures. So, growing up, I've faced various barriers that at times felt a bit unfair or a bit unjust. Not to say it's all been negative. I went to uni, I've traveled a lot, I've lived a pretty fulfilled and positive life, even with the challenges of my disability. But moving it to career, I realized that the scale of disability. So when I worked at a charity called Scope, I learned that about 14 million people in the UK have a disability. Wow. So this was at that point for me was much more about the barriers and the social impact, and there was as much political, narratives around the social change as there was business. But then through time, I started to realize that entrepreneurship is an amazing way to solve global challenges. So that was definitely a big part of where I became a lot more entrepreneurial. I've started a magazine, I've started a travel company, and more recently we'll come to a bit more in depth is Purple Goat and the influencer agency side. But I think entrepreneurship's been a great vehicle to create solutions to large scale problems that disabled people have often faced. And also just the advent of blogging and social media. So I started blogging in 2009, and through creating my own content, I've been voted in the top 100 most influential disabled people for quite a few years running now. And I suppose that just gave me a platform to, I've been on BBC Breakfast, I've written for The Guardian, I've consulted companies, spoken on stages, all that sort of influencer inverted comma life. But I was almost a bit early to the party. So brands were not generally paying influencers as a marketing strategy. And even when they were, they certainly weren't paying disabled content creators. So you can start to see already this sort of things I've experienced, things I've been up to. My mission is about making the world inclusive for disabled people. And in the end, the notion that by connecting brands with this vast disabled community that have a big spending power as well, it's the purple pound is around $8 trillion per year globally.
Is it really? My goodness.
It's a big one.
That is phenomenal.
It's a big number, right?
Wow.
So the business case became more apparent and that kind of tees us up now to talk about the agency and how brands are engaging with disabled people.
Yeah, it's amazing that is, and particularly about your personal journey, about some of the challenges that you face. Well done, Martyn, for powering ahead and having the magazine. And I also know that you've done scuba diving as well, which in itself is just mind-boggling. But it just proves that anything is possible, isn't it? Or
Yeah.
everything is possible. You've written a book about everything
The
is
book
possible.
titles Everything is Possible. Yeah,
Yeah, I love it.
absolutely.
I
Yeah,
love it.
and that's very much a sort of travel memoir. So through that kind of bloggy early stage influencer period of my career, I was lucky enough to be flown out to lots of amazing countries and essentially become like a accessible tourism consultant / content creator. So yeah, I was lucky to see a lot of the world, and the book is that sort of travel memoir.
Yeah, lovely. Good. So let's talk a little bit about Purple Goat now, because you've been going now for 3 years, I understand. How did all that come about?
So it was actually, yeah, connected to the magazine. The notion was that this platform for disabled people to create content in one place, and this was called Disability Horizons, would also have a business model where brands would advertise like any other magazine. And it was always challenging getting brands to understand the value of disabled consumers. But I had a coaching session. I've always been sort of very into self-development. I've been on incubators and all this kind of stuff. And there was a particular session where the notion was, what if instead of being a platform, a magazine, create an agency that could sit between brands and the many influencers that were starting to become more known and more apparent as a marketing strategy. So that would have been sort of 2019. So off the back of that coaching session, I did a bit of Googling and LinkedIn searching and found the GOAT agency, who I think have become quite known in the influencer world.
Yeah.
And it was more of a sort of knowledge sharing of, I could help them about disability. They could help me with understanding what influencer marketing is from a more sort of tangible, kind of agency perspective, because I didn't have that background. And yeah, all of that, the culmination was I partnered with the GOAT agency, hence of Purple Goat. There's the goat part, and purple is the colour synonymous with disability. So I'm a majority shareholder of Purple Goat, but the GOAT agency they've partnered with me and have a shareholding in it, and essentially were able to support me in the operational side, the how to sell to brand side, because I said before, didn't have a lot of experience in that. And then yeah, it's just gone from strength to strength, and over those 3 years there's been less and less reliance on resources at the GOAT agency. Purple Goat, apart from a bit of back office support, we're very much self-sufficient with our campaigns team, our strategy team, our business development team.
Great, that's good to hear. So how many people have you work in the team now?
We're up to nearly 20 now.
Are you really? That's
Yeah.
incredible. That's great.
Yeah.
So tell us a little bit about some of the campaigns, because when we were just talking off air, I was thinking that there's still lots and lots of companies that just wouldn't even think about having a disabled as part of their mix. And I'm not necessarily about necessarily saying a disabled only campaign, but as part of a mix. So you talked about inclusive. And I just wondered, how do we get that message out to brands to even consider disabled community? I mean, the business case that you were sharing to me almost makes sense in itself. But what's your message?
Yeah, I guess it's been lessons I've learned the 3 years around, the business case became clear, and brands get the business case very quickly. But to your question, to your point, it's then, well, how much do you go in on a sort of disability only product or a disability only feature? There might be a product that has a particular feature that's great for disabled people, and then looking at, do you do content creators talking about even a mainstream brand and a mainstream product, but only speaking to disabled audiences? And then again, to that point, do you have content creators with a disability as part of a broader campaign? So there's 4 distinct layers to consider, and there's probably a few other variables that we could throw in, but I think that helps create that texture of different ways of doing this. I think that there are particular the sort of product specific companies, there was always a very natural affinity, and that's just an obvious, like Motability is one of our clients, so that's just very disabled people talking about Motability to disabled audiences. When we've worked with clients like Tesco and Starling Bank, that there's been a mixture of where we can lean into that disability benefit, that disability narrative, and essentially trying to convert the purple pound, of that large audience over. With Tesco, just to give a bit more of a sort of example, they had, I think it was like 100 changing places toilets. So over the country in 100 stores, there's these very highly adapted toilets that have hoists and more facilities for disabled customers. And on that instance, disabled content creators spoke about the need and the benefit of the changing places toilets, but the audience that we targeted were non-disabled people, because it was amazing for Tesco customers to understand that Tesco as a brand cares about disabled people.
Nice.
So there's all these kind of different variables and different overlaps. Again, with Starling, having online banking from a mobile phone is actually very, useful and helpful for a lot of disabled people as it is non-disabled people. So we were able to lean in to some of those features of the Starling banking app by disabled people, and particularly for disabled people. So yeah, there's a lot of ways you can cut and slice it, but ultimately you're trying to get brand awareness and product awareness with a mix of disabled voices in your marketing mix, but also targeting disabled consumers, because it's a massive growth opportunity as well.
Absolutely. And what we were talking about again off air was the engagement rate in some of the campaigns for disabled are way higher than your average 1.67% on Instagram. So I understand. Well, that of course is what brands want. They want conversion, performance metrics more than anything now. Yes, there's the altruistic and the this is what we're doing, but ultimately, if they can show the internal case that actually people are buying products as a result of these campaigns, then there's a greater opportunity for them to invest even more in the sector, isn't there?
Absolutely. I think when we sort of look at, we talk about nano, micro, macro influencers, there's definitely less macro moving into like just broader celebrity narratives. There probably is a lesser number of disabled people at that level. There's more for various societal reasons. And, I think even just having TV being more diverse and having more disability presenters, all that kind of stuff. So there's an improvement in the number of disabled people at that level. But absolutely our experience the last 3 years is within that nano micro section, there's a lot of disabled content creators, and ever more growing, ever more becoming part, looking for that career and working in that sector. And as you say, the engagement rate that they're getting, even if it's a 5, 10, 20,000 follower number, the engagement rate is often double the amount of the sort of industry standard. And that's fantastic for the brands that we're working with, because the sentiment, the brand awareness is only going in the right direction for them.
Yeah, and also one of the things I talk about so often with influencer marketing is understanding the value and the relevance of your followers. It's all very well for somebody to have, 10,000 followers or 50,000, but actually, if they're not aligned to the creators' values or what they
Yes.
stand for, then a lot of that audience can be wasted. Whereas I would surmise that with your community, people that are disabled generally do. It's quite tribal, is it not? Where people come together and support each other, so that others would maybe follow follow those creators that are also disabled.
Yeah, and I think following that lens of, I've talked about entrepreneurship in my career, but really it's about education. And I'm fascinated. You look at the history of disability rights. There was no legal rights until 1995. There's definitely still a political struggle around government policy that is seen as investment in untapping the potential of disabled people rather than a narrative of cost or expense. It should be like, if I have my wheelchair and my care team, I've ended up starting multiple companies and creating jobs and paying tax and contributing back in to society. So there's a very political narrative. But I think, in the end, businesses are those that create employment. So when we want to get more employment for disabled people, it's brands understanding the value of disabled people in the workforce is vital. And if products and services are more accessible, that makes the life of disabled people better. Yeah. So I think we've moved from sort of legal to political to business, not that there isn't a legal and business narrative still to defend or to progress. But yeah, all of that is really just summarizing that a lot of disabled content creators have started out very much wanting to make the world better for our community. And it's not driven just by, going on Love Island or, sort of the more broader influencer things that I'm not saying every influencer has that force behind them, but let's be honest, there is a thing about you can make a shitload of money and you can, have fame and success and achievement. But I think even when you don't look at disability, any content creator or influencer that has a true purpose and a real passion for what they talk about, that doesn't have to be social rights. That can be, cooking or fashion or whatever. But when there's that absolute authenticity is the buzzword, isn't it? That's the value that works better from the marketing strategy with the brand, because people nowadays on social media sniff out the inauthenticity. So yeah, there's a few different points there, but I think it speaks quite loudly to your point that disabled influencers are very, congruent with the values of the brands.
Yeah, no, amazing. Thank you, Martyn. And are there any sort of types of content that you've liked from disabled influencers and content creators that have made you smile or entertained you or educated you? A few names that we might be able to share with the audience that perhaps don't know this community?
Yeah, absolutely. Well, so one is Tess Daly. So it's on Instagram, not to be confused with the presenter Tess Daly. But the Tess that I know, she's got, well over 100, but I think in the hundreds of thousands of followers now. So she's got the same disability as me. So there's that sort of, she's in a wheelchair, and there's all the stereotypes of, can you be disabled? Can you be in a wheelchair and be sexy and be fashionable? And Tess is really tearing down those traditional negative stereotypes that you can't be. And she's working with many big brands, and she's very sassy and, wears very, awesome outfits. And she does makeup tutorials and how she shows how she's able to do her makeup with very limited arm strength. So yes, whenever I see Tess, that always does make me smile a lot as well. And there's Charlie Randall, and I think his handle is not quite politically correct, NQPC. And he does some cool podcasts and really great, sort of Instagram content with his partner. But he was also at London Fashion Week. There was a inclusive fashion show under the brand Unhidden Clothing, who are also another brand to follow online. And they're just, trying to really bust the myths around fashion, a bit like Tess. But it was great to see Charlie on the runway at London Fashion Week as well.
Amazing. Oh, I've got to invite them because I'm involved in London Fashion Week myself with a big fashion show. So yeah, we've got one in September. So I'll dig those people
Amazing.
out. This is great. Thank you, Martyn, for being with us today. It's been really insightful and sort of sharing your wisdom. Before I go, just one question I'd love to ask you is, who has influenced you?
Yeah, I love that kind of question. And as always, as you can tell, I like to draw on different disciplines, right? So within disability rights, Jane Campbell and Tanni Gray-Thompson, the ex-Paralympian,
Yeah.
are very much people that have achieved in their own sort of vertical of social change and of Paralympics, but now very much flying the flag around disability inclusion in the bigger way. So yeah, disability specific, they're real like mentors of mine. But I also sort of draw from politics and business. So, ever since I read Branson's book 20 years ago, that was a big inspiration for a lot of the ways that I've used entrepreneurship for my mission around disability inclusion. And I think on that political social change side, I really believe that we've ended up in a world that's quite divisive, and we need to change the narrative that it's not disabled or race or gender or sexuality, which sometimes can be pitted a bit that way. That I think it's the diversity agenda, but anyone that is not in some of the protected characteristics, it's everybody. Inclusion is everybody. And I think someone like the sort of Gandhis and Luther King and Obamas have inspired me around that progress of civil rights as well.
Lovely. That's really lovely to hear. You were so eloquent in the way that you shared that. So how can people find out more about you?
So purplegoatagency.com is where there's sort of more info on the brands we've worked with, on the business case for brands, and yeah, ways of working, that kind of stuff. And then as I've got through the other side of the hardest part of getting the business off the ground and growing it initially, I've had a little bit more headspace the last few months to get back to blogging and writing about some of the broader stuff. So martynsibley.com, that's Martyn with a Y, just to be a bit awkward. There's a lot of stuff there since 2009 of all my travels and evolution as a content creator. But I've launched the Purple Power newsletter, and that's taking a lot of the lessons of Purple Goat and trying to empower other change makers, whether they're political activists or entrepreneurs, how to make the world better for disability. But like I said before, I think there's a lot of richness for anyone just wanting to make the world better.
Martyn, thank you so much for joining us on the Influence Global podcast.
Thank you for having me.